Yes, I'm taking apart my door wreath, but more about that later on in the video. I've just been doing some gardening. I spent about an hour this morning, a few minutes in the front garden, transplanting things and bringing them round to my part of the garden here at the back of the house. Now, if you're a novice gardener like me, or perhaps a gardener with more experience and you'd be willing to share your expertise in the comments, do please consider subscribing to my channel. All you need to do is to hit the big red button that says subscribe, and then that means next time you open the YouTube app on your phone, your laptop or your computer, one of my videos will be waiting for you. So for today's project, I'm trying to creep my garden across the full length of the side of the garden which we had cleared in July. We used to have a chicken run, an aviary, tortoises and rabbits, and they have all now been rehomed and their houses dismantled. And rather than lawning the whole area, which my husband wanted to do for ease, I've decided that I'm going to try and grow my own flowers so that I can enjoy cut flowers indoors all year round, and perhaps even take some of them to the classes that I teach. Now, if you've been watching these videos for a while, you know I'm always complaining about my ineffectual digging, but I'm going to spare you some of the pain of that. What I did this morning was to take my gardening trug out to the front door, and I used a garden fork to lift up my hellebores, and I had been given those probably at the beginning of the year, and most definitely they were given to me by a friend at Flower Club. They're stinking hellebores. I'm never quite sure whether it means the foliage has a scent, an unpleasant scent to it, or whether the flowers have an unpleasant scent. But I'm hoping that they're going to grow reasonably bushy so that I can cut them. And with a peg on my nose, I'll be bringing them indoors to enjoy in the spring months. So I planted those, and then I had my husband's voice ringing my ear because he doesn't like bulbs in our garden because he says they just get in the way when you want to plant other things. And lo and behold, as I thrust my spade into the ground, I sliced one of my newly planted daffodil bulbs in half. I wonder whether half a bulb will survive. You'll have to let me know in the comments. And then finally, I have planted the last of my tulips. Now, if you watched last week's video, you'll have noticed that some of the tulip bulbs I was planting had gone rotten, and some of them had totally disintegrated. And out of the 30 or so I think I planted, there were 4 duds. And just as I got to the end of the planting today, I just noticed a couple more of the bulbs just didn't seem to have any substance to them. So I'm not entirely sure that I'll be buying my bulbs from the same source, but hopefully I won't have to buy any bulbs for quite a long while, because I specifically bought the ones that were guaranteed, as much as they could be, to be perennial, and I have done my absolute best to plant them at the right time. So if you watched last week's video, the 24/7 rule, only plant your tulips, because they're much more sensitive than your daffodil bulbs, when the temperatures are regularly at 7 degrees or below. It has to be sufficiently cool for them, and trying to plant them as deep as possible. 20 centimetres, I'd round it up to 24, because 24/7 is quite easy to remember. And then I worked out that probably 24 centimetres, 20 centimetres was the depth of the, what's the bit of the spade called? A paddle of the spade? I don't quite know what that's called. So I thought perhaps I could speed things up by putting my spade in the ground and wobbling it, and then sort of pushing it forwards to get my bulbs to plant in. But lo and behold, I had a great deal of difficulty even doing that. And then I discovered in certain parts of the garden, because my husband had previously divided the garden up for the outhouses and the livestock, that he had put old compost bags underneath to suppress the weeds. So it was a good job I was digging sufficiently deeply, because I was then I pulled up 2 old compost bags. Any number of cable ties, his favourite accessory. So now I'm doing a little bit of garden cleaning as well. So fingers crossed, I know. So at long last, I can strike bulb planting off my list. I've transplanted some of the hellebores, and I think next time I'm in the garden, I'm going to transplant some of the perennials that I had planted in my tubs, my instant garden that I made back in July. So if you've got any helpful, handy comments, or you just want to cheer me on from the sidelines, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Now, I did say at the beginning of the video I was taking apart my door wreath. This is a part completed door wreath. It's one of the sample pieces that I made on one of my online flower classes very recently. The delightful problem of teaching flower arranging classes is that come Christmas time, classes are really popular. Everybody wants to make a door wreath, and it's such a lovely thing to do. The problem is I end up with about 27 half-made door wreaths, and they just hang around. So what I thought I would do was actually take off this greenery, because this year I've decided for my own door wreath, instead of having a wreath that is quite neat and compact all the way around, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and make a door wreath that has got more wavy fronds to it. So we'll have to see how I get on with that. Door wreaths are a lovely thing to make, and particularly if you have access to a garden or you've got a friend's garden that you can chop from. So because I've been collecting lots of greenery for my door wreaths, I've ended up with quite a collection of stuff, and this is what I'm talking about when I want to make my door wreath having longer fronds to it. So here I've got a couple of stems of yew, which to be honest I have rescued from the compost bin, and some holly. I don't normally like using holly in my wreath because it's just too darn prickly, but when you get this new growth it doesn't have any prickles at all, so it's quite easy to work with. I'm also going to put these oak leaves indoors. I picked those up, they were windswept, and I picked them up from a dog walk I was doing, and they've just been sitting on my patio table. So what I'm going to do is bring those indoors to let them dry out, and I might just glitz these leaves either with spray paint or a little bit of rub and buff. I don't know whether you caught the video that I posted at the beginning of the week when I was drying fresh orange slices in my air fryer, and I was doing a little bit of zhuzhing up of my amaryllis, and that's when I used a touch of rub and buff. In order to glitz up my leaves, they will need to be dry to begin with, so they're going in a vase, probably sitting in my garage until they've totally dried out. If you are planning to forage for your own greenery, whether it's going to be in your garden or your neighbour's garden, I would say at this time of the year when it's cool and wet and damp that you don't need to be so fastidious about getting all your materials in water. And what I normally do is to cut my greenery and I put it in a big bag, an IKEA bag or a garden truck, and I just put it under my patio table to keep it away from the elements. But at some stage you will need to sort through and decide what you've got and whether you need to cut any more. So here I've got some conifer. It's got quite a bushiness to it. Sometimes the conifer can be very flat, but it may well be that you might have a more decorative variety than me, which would look absolutely lovely. Juniper is very nice. They've got grey foliage, although it can be quite prickly to the touch. So I've got a bit of Christmas tree foliage and some yew, some conifer. I have got some holly. I've also got some viburnum tinus. I'm not absolutely convinced this is going to survive out of water. So what I might do is to take that indoors, put it in water, and I might use that in a table arrangement instead. But what I do like about the viburnum tinus is it's really pretty when it's in this bud stage, is that it's really pretty in the flower stage. But just look at those gorgeous little textural buds. And if you don't cut your viburnum tinus and leave it on the garden, you will actually get tiny little berries. They're almost deep purple, black in colour. I'm talking about Christmas tree. Here are some Christmas tree trimmings. I actually found these in the street, so keep an eye out near any places that are selling Christmas trees, because you may get a few lucky windfalls that fall into your path. And I think possibly one of my favourite foliages is the buried ivy, and not all ivy is the same. These have got quite a green tinge. Sometimes they have blacker berries, and they do vary in size. And the last foliage I've got is this, and I can't remember the name. I've got a feeling it's something beginning with C. If you know what it is, let me know in the comments. It's like a very skinny laurel or a rather juicy dark-leaved bay. Is it a bay laurel? A combination of the two, I'm not entirely sure, but just how lovely the glossy leaves are. And then you can always put your foliage in upside down and get a contrast with the underside. So you've got the matte and the gloss all in one. Foliage sorted, a nice little production line. I am going to start taking apart my wreath. Now this shouldn't be too difficult to do because all I've done is wrap the greenery on using some floristry wire. It's called a mossing wire, and if you're interested in making your own door wreath, I will leave a buying list where to buy your wreath frame from, and also what's called the mossing wire. And I've also got a full-length video showing how I made my door wreath a couple of years ago. It'll be really helpful for you if you're making your door wreath for the first time, or if you need a little bit of a reminder if you've previously been to class. And if you like your door wreath to be a little bit more compact, I always cut my greenery about this long between my thumb and forefinger. Need to make sure I'm going to save my pine cones as well. Interestingly, when I added this pine cone to my wreath, it was fully open, but they're a bit like a little weather barometer. And in the damp, cooler days, they close up. But if I was to put this indoors, it would open up almost like slow motion popcorn over the course of the next 24 hours. And I've wired that on, giving it a little stem, which makes it easier to put into your wreath, or you could always hot glue gun your decorations in afterwards. And if you're not sure how to wire your pine cones, I'll leave a link to a video. I think it was one of the videos I filmed last year for Vlogmas, possibly the first one in the series. I'll leave a link to that so you can follow along with that one too. Sometimes I bind my greenery on freehand, but other times I make little bunches. So here I've got some Viburnum tinus, some of the ivy, and then the little, well, shall we call it bay laurel? And I've just bound it together with some wire so it doesn't fall apart while I'm wrapping the big bundle onto my door wreath. So if you are making your own door wreath this year, I would love to see what yours looks like and also what your Christmas tree looks like. So if you haven't already joined, why don't you check out my free Facebook group, Flower Start World, and I'll leave a link to that in the description underneath this video. And on the subject of joining things, I do also have a YouTube membership group where you get early access to my Monday videos and also free access to my monthly Zoom flower class. So I added on some conifer as a base to my wreath. Sometimes you'll see florists either starting with a layer of Christmas tree foliage or even moss. So I'm back at the beginning. My demonstration piece hasn't been wasted. So thank you so much for joining me in the garden this week and for cheering me on from the sidelines. I think it's probably a time for a warming cup of tea, and then I'm going to put on my fingerless gloves, wrap up warm and sit out here in the cool of a December morning and get on with making my wreath. That's all for me for now, and I'll see you next week in the garden.